And finally, on to Syria, where protests are still ongoing. Now, you hear a lot of talk on the mainstream media about the protests and about the 5,000 people who have reportedly been killed. But there's little mention that this is actually part of an ongoing civil war. Protesters there are armed and are battling the government. The divide very much along sectarian lines, Sunnis versus Shiites. Most recently, a former official with the FBI is reporting U.S. and NATO forces have already landed just outside of Syria and are planning to train militants to overthrow the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. Critics say this move will fuel the civil war and give an excuse for a future intervention. And I want to talk more about this idea of a potential future intervention on the part of the U.S. and NATO forces. Now, as far as a UN resolution under the guise of the responsibility to protect, Russia and China have both already vowed to veto this, not to let this happen. However, as we mentioned, there are reports now of U.S. troops in Jordan right now, right along the Syrian border. They apparently left Iraq and are stationed about 10 kilometers from the Syrian border. They are apparently building surveillance towers, setting up camp there. So I want to talk more about this. And for that, let's go to the host of the Corbett Report, James Corbett, in Osaka, Japan. Hey there, James. Let's talk about this first. This was first reported by a former official within the ranks of the FBI, Sybil Edmond, who wrote that American soldiers are among the NATO troops that have, suddenly appeared on the Jordanian-Syrian border. She says the U.S. media has been instructed to censor itself. What have you heard regarding this?
Well, exactly right. This story comes from Sybil Edmonds, who did break this story over the weekend, and I was blessed enough to be part of the breaking of this story. And it comes from a number of different sources, including a Jordanian military officer. There's an employee of Royal Jordanian Airlines. There are also Iraqi journalists and an ex-Syrian journalist called Nizar Nayouf who helped to break this story. And what we've heard so far is that last week on December 8th, some of the troops that were supposedly coming home from Iraq, at least one military flight was diverted to the King Hussein Air Base they landed at the Prince Hassan Air Base in eastern Syria, and then the troops were transferred to the King Hussein Air Base at Al-Mafraq, which is just 10 kilometers from the Syrian border in Jordan. So that was the basis for the story, and what we've been hearing is that troops have been spotted in the area of the Jordan-Syrian border, spreading out from Al-Mafraq even closer towards the border in towns like Al-Bayej and Saran. And really, this is right across the border from Daraa, which has been the source of a lot of the protest and upheaval going on in Syria. So this is a serious move. But I think it's also important to stress what this story indicates and what it does not indicate. So far, what we're hearing is that it's only a few hundred troops. We're not talking of thousands of troops. This is not does not seem at this point, at any rate, to be a boots-on-the-ground invasion force by any means. But I think it relates to a story that broke in the Jordanian news last week that Western officials had met with King Abdullah in Jordan to ask for permission to set up electronic surveillance of Syria and also to attempt to sway more recruits to the so-called Free Syrian Army. So that it broke last week, and we are getting confirmation of that independently from Debka. And it should be noted also for the record that the Jordanian State Minister for Media and Communications, Rakan al-Majali, was prompted to come out and officially deny the story on December 13th. So yesterday, he came out and officially denied that in Jordanian state media. But
all right. So like you said, this is not a ground war. This is not a major effort. Not quite the next Libya even, although there were no ground troops there. But what we're hearing, in addition to what you're telling us about the surveillance towers, is that there's also at least plans in the works to start training Turkish troops. So talk to me about, I think it's important for people to understand the role of Turkey in all of this and the significance.
Absolutely. Well, that story also was broken by Sybil Edmonds last month, and that has since been confirmed in international media. But absolutely, Turkey has been, the southeastern Turkey, specifically a city called Hakkari, has been the base where U.S. is currently training Syrian rebels that are going to be, presumably going to be deployed in Syria for further destabilization of the Assad government. So that came out last month. As I say, it's now been confirmed in international media, and it's apparently being run by a Syrian defector colonel, Riyad al-Assad, in Hakkari in southeastern Turkey. So again, I think Turkey and Jordan, just for the optics, obviously don't want to be associated with this and don't want to confirm this on the record, but it has been confirmed by independent reporting. And what it indicates is absolutely a type of pincher movement that's being used. Both the northern border with Turkey and the southern border with Jordan are now being used as points of destabilization, where rebels are being recruited, swayed, and turned towards obviously the destabilization of the Assad government.
I think if you think about this geopolitically, James, I mean, this to me sounds like huge news. And other than your reporting and Sybil's reporting, there's very few places that this is being talked about. I know that Sybil said it in the thing that she wrote. She said that Western media who was there was told, you know, you can't talk about this yet. Why is this not a bigger story here in the U.S.?
I think presumably because obviously the U.S. doesn't want to, well, the obvious answer would be that the U.S. doesn't want to be seen to be interfering in the politics of the region, and obviously that wouldn't help any of the U.S.'s allies in the region, specifically Jordan, for example. It would be hugely unpopular for them to be admitting that they were allowing foreign military to do intervention in Syria from operating on their soil. So I think obviously there's a lot of international considerations to go on here, but I can confirm behind the scenes that two journalists at two different print media publications, mainstream media publications, have been told specifically not to cover this story. So it has been looked at least in the annals of American journalism, but they are not covering it at this time, and we'll have to see if we can get even further response. The DoD press office was contacted for comment on the story, but never got back to us.
Just real quick, James, a very quick prediction on your part for what we can expect to see and when we can expect to see it in Syria regarding U.S. troops.
Regarding U.S. troops specifically, I'm going to side probably with Pepe Escobar, who had a very important editorial recently, basically saying that NATO's strategy here is not to do an on-the-ground invasion, not even to do the type of thing that we saw in Libya with the humanitarian intervention, so-called, but instead to motivate Turkey to really start acting against Syria, and in order to secure their border and secure the situation.
All right, unfortunately, James, we're out of time. We just talked to Pepe earlier. Thank you so much for joining us from Osaka, Japan. James Corbett, host of the Corbett Report.